Hello, Danny. Thank you for joining me today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Can I just start by saying, not really a question, but I love your podcast. I DM'd you on X a couple of months ago, I think, after the Alex Hamosi episode, and then I binged you for a while. So I'm going to start by repeating what you said to Alex, basically, in that we've spent so much time together. So it's great to finally connect.
I love to hear that. And what do you think about the podcast speaks to you?
I think you clearly give a shit a lot more than the majority of people. And that inspires me to work a little bit harder as well. So I went into deep research mode for this, for example. Whereas most people, it's usually the same questions. Hey, tell me about yourself. Hey, tell me about this business. And like, they've done that exact same podcast 10 times. So why is there any motivation to do the 11th, right? You ask questions and you do your level of preparation. And I think you're really genuine. I think people like to listen to you in the same way that they like to listen to Joe Rogan because, they can tell there's no agenda, there's nothing hidden behind it. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the reflections and the truth behind it because I feel that way, but I don't always know if that's coming through. And so I appreciate you saying that.
That's definitely how you're coming across, my friend. So, you definitely got that in spades. Look, I want to start with entrepreneurship because I know you don't call yourself an entrepreneur, but I think you are because you've done many, many things since, being born, from the Little League blog to the Tuesday Treasure blog to Nick's Vision to the Sunny Times. You had that e-commerce business, didn't you, after you graduated political science at Binghamton, in the DM, that Substack, and then obviously now the podcast and of course the artofinterviewing.com where people should go. But you had many, many steps until you got to something that really exploded and is now taking off, and you found your feet with the podcast, right? Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, entrepreneurship, and maybe you might not use that word, but those lessons that you've kind of learned along and those stepping stones to get to where you are today, basically?
Yeah, I think it's a very astute observation that I don't consider myself an entrepreneur, but I've done entrepreneurial things and I very much could be characterized as one. I would say that it's been a journey of figuring out myself, and I've always listened. There have been a lot of times in my life where I've listened to the call being the thing that I was put here to do and placed in this moment to do. And at one point the call was, I'm just going to write a Little League blog because that makes the most sense. And at another time the call was, I'm going to start a podcast and interview people and talk to them in a way that inspires me and that I would want them to be interviewed. And so there have been times when I haven't followed that call as well. And sometimes that call leads to money and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you can't connect the dots until you look backwards. But none of those projects have really started, or the far majority haven't started because I wanted to make money. They've started because something inside of me said, this needs to exist in the world. And then if I do it for 3 years, like the podcast has been going on now for 3 years, that's when the recognition starts, or some people start saying, wow, this is pretty cool. Wow, I got to go check out, you did this 377 more times. Like, I got to understand this at a deeper level. Like, why is this person so interested in doing this? So I think that's kind of where my entrepreneurial journey has come from and what it's taught me.
The consistency of your podcast is obviously very impressive. We both started in 2020. I think I started in June or July. You started in September or something, right? You started by doing mini phone calls with people on X, and I started in a very, very similar way. I was speaking to my clients, and it was lockdown. We couldn't do these live events that I used to throw and these parties, so we started to put them on Zoom instead. But tell us a little bit about, I guess, the progression, really, because when you started, it was just you on audio, right? And now you've got, episodes in studios, you've got a great editor and team that put together the clips and everything. That wouldn't have happened if you didn't start on a webcam doing audio, right? So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I think that when we start things, we compare ourselves to people who have already done all the things. And we're like, how can I compete with this person if I don't have a studio, if I don't have the right microphone, if I don't have the right equipment? And I think it's all nonsense. And I think what you really have to understand is that where the thing goes is going to be different than what it is when it starts.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. And that's something that you have to accept and embrace and love. I like to think about it. It's like loving the part of the journey you are at. If you can do that, if you can really sit with the part of the journey you're at and love that part of the journey, it will eventually build and build and build into something greater if that is your intention. So I think that's been a huge unlock for me and a huge realization. And I knew from the start of doing the podcast, this is something that I enjoy doing for the sake of doing it. And because I enjoy doing it for the sake of doing it, I'm going to want to continue doing it at better and better ways.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the progression.
Well, you mentioned there about enjoying that stage of the journey, and that relates very much to the first ever post that you put on Instagram, okay? Because I'm not sure if you had other things that you deleted prior, but the first thing sitting on your profile is a quote, and you said, fall in love with whatever part of the journey you're on. If you're just starting, be grateful in the beginning. If you're in the middle, embrace the boring path. And if you're at the end, smile because you made it this far. I think you are probably, correct me if you feel differently, but you've probably gone from the starting to that middle part. And I think the big jump has been those episodes with like someone like Gary Vee or Alex Hormozy or Chris Williams, but where it's kind of, your audience has probably gone from getting more downloads in a day than you would previously get in the previous year or something like that. And I've seen that exponential growth with some episodes. I've been doing this for 3 years as well now. But have you found that to be true in that the growth comes in, how do I put this? More can happen in a day than can happen in a decade after it all compounds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know about decade necessarily yet because I haven't been there yet, and I'm curious to see what the 11th year of the podcast looks like.
Sure.
But something like, the days that really stand out are like, it's crazy what happens, and it's crazy the feeling I get. And the feeling I get is like, wow, all of this work that I did, sticking through this when it didn't make sense, it all paid off in this one moment. And then you start to like look back and you're like, wow, if I had quit then, if I'd stopped doing this then. But what's fascinating is that, like, I'm so happy you read that quote about the beginning, middle, and end, because I still view myself in the beginning.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm 3 years into the podcast, over 400 episodes. And I'm thinking to myself, I want to do this for at least 30 years. So if I consider the first 10 years the beginning, like, where are we going to go from here? I committed to doing this podcast for 10 years to myself. And I guess I could have said, the first year of the 10 was the beginning, or the first 3 were the beginning, and now entering the 4th, it's the middle. But I view the first 10 as the beginning, because I know where this is going to go. And I'm really excited to be able to talk about it at this point where I'm 28 years young and I found the thing that lights me up and makes me feel so alive. So yeah, that's where I view it.
I feel you, man. I'm 27 myself, so I completely get where you're coming from. You mentioned there about what would happen in perhaps year 11. I know you've got a bit of a grand aspiration to sell out Madison Square Garden, right? And I know, Gary.
Oh yeah,
like buying the New York Jets. It's great to have that long-term ultimate goal that you can visualize. Well, why? I heard you talk about that on podcasts, like that is the goal. But why is that the goal? I've never actually heard you explain like the reason behind that.
When I was a kid, I started this blog called Knicks Vision, and I was a huge New York Knicks basketball fan. Like that, I was crazy. I watched every game. I wrote reports on every game. I met the players by virtue of doing the blog. And at a certain point, I understood I could never be a player on this court. 19,763 people are not coming to watch me play basketball. That is not my gift. I love shooting hoops, but it's not something that I'm put on this earth to do. So I always was interested, like, what am I put on this earth to do? What is the reason for being? What am I doing here? And once I had a clearer picture or clearer understanding of that, I asked myself, how can I expand the vision to the craziest place that I can imagine that's in alignment with my childhood? And that to me gets me up every morning. That to me gets me excited because it relates strongly to the nostalgia I feel about Madison Square Garden, taking the train out there. I mean, dude, it's like I have so many memories of going to Knicks and Mets games, like a baseball team. And it's like, to me, the joy of watching athletes perform in their gifts. If I develop my gifts enough as an interviewer, as a podcaster, potentially that could be the place that we can go. And so that to me is the really exciting part, and that's why that's the vision.